Welcome back to the Swamp247 Podcast. I'm Thomas Goldkamp here with my co-host Blake Alderman. We're going to talk a little bit of Florida football. Obviously, SEC Media Days is right around the corner on Monday. Blake, Florida made a bit of an interesting decision, I thought, with who they're sending to SEC Media Days. Florida will be the only team that is sending players from just one side of the ball and not the other. The Gators are going to send two defensive players, Zachary Carter and Ventrell Miller. Obviously, both fifth-year seniors, real leaders in the program. What's your take on this selection for Florida in terms of the guys going?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think when you look at leaders for Florida, those guys that are part of help me out with what they call it. It's like the leadership committee,
council,
I believe.
Yeah.
Leadership
committee,
council.
Either one.
So those two guys being just, heading into their final year, just what they bring as far as, the leadership being in the program, the guys that really understand, what Dan Mullen wants from the program. I do think it's a little surprising not to have an offensive guy of some sort, but I think whenever you look at just from top to bottom, that those guys really mature with, just being in the program for so long. They've done a lot of media. So I think that it's just kind of a pat on the back to those guys for just what they've done in the program and what they bring from a leadership point of view. So it would be interesting to hear thoughts from people on the other side of the ball. Obviously there are going to be a lot of questions they field. There's a lot of guys that are being replaced on the offensive side of the ball, and those things would be interesting to hear, when those questions are asked. But, it makes sense to me just getting those guys in there, Ventrell Miller, Zachary Carter, just from what they've done to the program and just how long they've been in the program.
Yeah, well, Blake, it's summer when, Florida announces who they're bringing and fans are coming up with all these theories for what it means. My first thought was I was a little disappointed as a media guy just from the standpoint of, you do want to get stories on both the offense and the defense. And I think Florida does have a ton of question marks offensively. Now, obviously, Dan Mullen is the kind of coach where you're never really going to worry about the offense while he's in charge. But you have a lot of things. I mean, Kyle Trask, a Heisman finalist last year, is gone at quarterback. You have, Dan Mullen's handpicked highest rated recruit at quarterback now taking over. You have an offensive line that returns some pieces, but those are probably the pieces that, struggled the most last season. And then you've got to replace really some generational type talents in first round picks, Kyle Pitts and Kadarius Toney. So I was a little disappointed that they're not sending an offensive guy from that selfish standpoint of being media and really kind of wanting to get stories on both. But I think it was Pat Dooley that made the point on the radio yesterday, kind of to what you were speaking to, is these guys are leaders, and Florida was, I think, so bad defensively a year ago that this may be a move by Dan Mullen to kind of prop those guys up, not just to reward them for, sticking around, being fifth-year seniors, which I think is part of it as well, but really giving those guys the sense of confidence that, hey, you're on the main stage now, all the eyes are on you. I mean, if you haven't been to SEC Media Days, for some of the fans, it really is. It's a ridiculously marquee event. I mean, it's that kind of thing where, even if you've been there a couple times, sometimes you still get a little starstruck. I mean, there's cameras everywhere. From the player standpoint, like if you look at the schedule that they go through, it's like bang, bang, bang. Every 5 to 10 minutes, they're in a new interview room with different set of cameras and all that. So I think it really gives those guys kind of a sense of importance. And I think that, the way Florida's defense played last year, they need help. And so if that's the reason that Dan Mullen's sending these guys is to kind of set the tone, hey, you guys are the leaders, and if we're going to take the next step, the defense has to move forward. I think that's a good call. I don't know, Blake, maybe we can talk about some of the questions that we would ask about this team going into SEC Media Days. I guess if you got to ask one question of these guys, what would it be?
Well, it would be on the defensive side, obviously with them being there, just how bad it was last year, with just from different parts, it seems like the secondary was really where they struggled. But I think there was some trickle down effect because I do think the defensive line didn't get the push you would want to see. So I guess for me, it would just be, from things all the way to, how the younger guys that, last year that we were talking about that, we wanted to see more snaps on, how have they really worked, in the spring season and really this off season, seeing that we didn't get it, to cover spring football. And then how those, transfer guys like, Daquan Newkirk or an Antonio Shelton have really kind of helped bring some veteran leadership to that defensive line, which would have been young. So I think for me, it would just be the questions about, the pieces that we haven't seen that we didn't get to see in the spring, that a lot of fans, a lot of media people were wondering where they were last season, and just where the, kind of the help that those veteran type of guys through the transfer portal bring.
Yeah, I look at what the defense has to do to kind of fix, not just be not historically bad, but to be better than average, to be above average. I keep going back to the defensive line. I think that unit has to really, really take a major step forward. You mentioned the 2 transfers. I think that was obviously a huge position of need. But now you've got some younger guys that, former 5-star in Javon Dexter, like he needs to take the next step. Some of these other younger guys have to start to contribute. But I think one of the biggest things for me in looking at Florida's defense is they have to be able to force more takeaways. If you look at the biggest difference, I think, between 2019 and 2020 from the standpoint of really impacting games, they just didn't force as many takeaways. And that's a situation where if they had forced a couple more takeaways last year with the kind of offense Florida has, maybe you're talking about an extremely different season.
Definitely.
So I think, and the reason I go back to the defensive line is I think when you look at a lot of the analytics guys have kind of talked about Florida's havoc rate and the rate that they got after the passer really didn't dip a whole lot from 2019 to 2020. Which is surprising because those are usually metrics that end up helping predict that you're going to force turnovers. I think the reason for that is because a lot of times Florida put up those numbers, those havoc rate type numbers against the lesser teams on the schedule. And you'd expect Florida to be able to do that with some of the guys it has. I think where Florida needs to take the next step is they need to start to have some of those dominant guys up front. I think Zach Carter can be one of those guys. Brenton Cox, if he can take the next step, can be one of those guys. But you need to have dominant guys that get it done, not just against the Missouris, the Kentuckys, the South Carolinas, but are also having that kind of impact in terms of getting to the quarterback, forcing them to make quicker decisions in games like LSU, Georgia, Alabama. And I think that's where we saw problems for Florida's defense last year. So I'm curious to see, to listen to Zach Carter and hear what he has to say about their progression. All the reports I've heard from people that we've talked to close to the program have been that they feel really good about the defensive line. They feel really good about those 2 transfers. But you're going to be young in the secondary. I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That could be addition by subtraction. But to me, Blake, that defensive line has to step up and really make life easier on the rest of the defense.
Definitely. And there's a lot of questions you getting, think to ask, just even like we mentioned before, just the loss of so many marquee players on the offense, being the defensive side, you obviously have to defend them. You have to learn how to scheme around them, just some of the guys that have, that maybe you have seen step up, there are a lot of things you can ask, new coaching, obviously not at their position, but just there's so many different things, maybe what are they doing differently from last year they did to this year. So I am interested, SEC Media Day, if in the SEC in the South, man, it's like its own little holiday. And if you can see it from just all the fans that are there, I always laugh whenever the coaches and the players are walking in. You see so many people like just arms stretched out with like little helmets to get signed and things like that. So that's like the first sign of college football is coming. So that's always kind of a big event for people down in the South. So I'm excited that it's only a couple more Saturdays until it's time for college football again.
Yeah, and it won't be completely the same this year. Obviously, there's still a number of COVID-19 protocols in place. I don't think the fans will really be allowed in the lobby this year, unfortunately.
Right. I was just going off of more of a traditional
for sure,
where it's always just such a big deal.
For sure. And I think that, that's the point I think of. It is a big deal for these players to get to experience that. And so let's flip over to the offensive side of the ball, Blake. We talked about a lot of question marks there. What's the biggest one for you? I think for me, it's the O-line still.
It is for me too. I think I think that's going to be anybody's, first question that comes to the top of their head. That is obviously number one. How are they going to replace some of these pass catchers? Kyle Pitts, Kadarius Toney, 2 first-round draft pick, guys. Even just we said it a lot last year that past the usual suspects of the wide receiver group and the pass catcher group last year, there were a lot of guys that have made some plays, a little bit of unknowns. How have they kind of taken that role to that next step? So the Jacob Copelands, the Justin Shorters, Trent Whittemore. Obviously you probably would have seen a little bit more uptick from him last year had he not been dealing with some injury. So just how those kind of guys, maybe the pass catchers, some of those names that aren't maybe household names, how they've kind of progressed along. But if I had to think of questions, you can't not circle back to the offensive line just because that's kind of been the Achilles heel of the offense. Ideally you think that the offense will shift from that heavy passing attack that they had under, Kyle Trask this past season. And you think that it would go to maybe a little bit more of a traditional offense, that Dan Mullen's run where you see a lot of more, QB runs, a lot more focus on the running game. So, I would be interested to see, or at least to hear about, how those changes, if at all, are taking place.
Yeah, and I think, another big factor in that this year is going to be they will have a full offseason of strength and conditioning. Now, so will everybody else. But that could really help that group, I think, particularly because, we've talked about for that group to take a step forward, they need some of the younger guys to really push for jobs. The Josh Braun types, maybe a Michael Tarquin, those types. And I think those guys physically, I mean, Ethan White, I was looking at, Jeremiah Moon put a video up on YouTube the other day of the team's picture day, and Ethan White just looks huge. I mean, he looks like he's ready to be a mauler. So you need those type of guys to step up. I'm with you on that. I think that's where it's got to start, especially if you want to be a run-based offense. But Blake, I mean, I think the difference for me this year, and maybe this is revisionist history a little bit, but I felt like going into 2020, you knew Kyle Trask was going to be one of the better quarterbacks in the league. I mean, we were talking about him being a top 3 quarterback in the league. You knew that Kyle Pitts was probably the number 1 tight end in the conference. So you had some guys that you knew were legitimate star-type pieces. I don't know that you have that on this Florida offense. Like, yes, the running back room is very deep. You've got multiple guys that have taken carries, but if I'm being honest, I don't consider Dameon Pierce a game breaker right now. I don't really consider Malik Davis a game breaker. Going over to receiver last year, nobody expected, I think, Kadarius Toney to have the kind of year he did. But a lot of people thought Trayvon Grimes would kind of step forward and take the step that he did. I don't know that I feel as confident about that happening this year with some of the names. I mean, you mentioned it. If a guy like Trent Whittemore can step up, that helps a lot. But are you concerned at all that there maybe just aren't enough elite guys on this offense? Or do you think that's something that is probably an overblown concern? And, Florida's pretty good developing guys. Billy Gonzalez has done it routinely, and we'll see those guys start to emerge.
I don't know if I'm just naive, but I really do think that the staff does a good job of developing guys. And I do agree that, on paper, when you look at it right now, there are just guys that, you don't have a Kyle Pitts, you don't have a Kyle Trask, you don't have, a couple years ago, a guy like Van Jefferson, where you knew he was going to be really productive, was going to work himself into, a higher draft pick. There just isn't a guy like that when you look at those position groups of, those skill type of guys that really jump out to me. But I look at that and I see that, a guy like Jacob Copeland, he's been in the program a while. I think that drops were kind of the thing last year. If he can work in the offseason and have that time to where he can, work the jugs machine or get some time in the film room with the coaching staff, and you don't have the limitations that you did, into the 2020 season last year, I think that there can be a chance to have some resurgence of some guys, and I look at it every year to where, was it last year? I think it was last year heading into the season. Obviously, Kadarius Toney had a year that a lot of people weren't expecting into the year. But when you look at it, going into that season, we all knew that Kyle Pitts was going to be a dude. He was going to be one of the best players there. But I remember last year, being on the podcast heading into the season and looking at the wide receiver room that Florida had last year and not really seeing a guy that was going to be a true number 1, a true game breaker type position. So, last year when I was sitting there thinking these things, man, I wonder who's going to be the guy that steps up, who's going to be that. And I feel like every year, whenever you have a wide receiver room where you've got guys that are moving on, if you don't have some guys returning back, you really have to work on the development. I think that that's something the staff does really good at. They do a great job of getting guys developed, moved on to the league. They're getting a lot more time to wherever they can work on those things and have to do meetings through Zoom. You can actually sit in the rooms with the coaches and have that interaction. So I don't put a lot of weight into heading into the season that, yes, I agree with you that there's not a guy that really jumps out to me that's going to be, a Kyle Pitts or, I guess that's big shoes to fill, but just a guy that we look at and you're like, man, that's going to be the dude for Florida this year. That's going to be the guy. But I think that that's something that you can see over time, into the season next year. Are we going to not, I think I need to see a couple games before I really, make or break that decision on there. But, I felt like I said last year that there wasn't really a guy in that position group last year at wide receiver that was really going to jump out to be the guy. So I'm kind of in a wait and see approach with that one.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned Jacob Copeland. I think he's one that everybody kind of has circled. Turns out he's going to be wearing the number 1 jersey. That's a pretty big deal at Florida going back to the Urban Meyer days. Both of the guys that have worn the number 1 jersey and have moved on from Florida since Dan Mullen took over have been first-round picks. Blake, I had this kind of for us to talk about. What does it mean to you that the coaches have felt comfortable giving Jacob Copeland the number 1 jersey?
They have to be confident in him. They have to be really confident in his abilities. That's not something that, I know it's a jersey number and some people are listening to this or watching this to think, dude, it's just a number. Like, who cares? And, that is true, but it means a lot in the program. It means a lot to these players. I think that whenever you give someone something like that, if you're on the coaching staff, I just think you don't give that position to Florida. And this isn't a staff that really gives things away. They don't give something away for, someone to have that extra motivation. You have to put in that work, and that you have to have the motivation on your own to get something like that. So seeing that work that, or at least seeing that they're giving him that number, they think that of him, that he had to show these guys something in the spring, something in the off season, just being accountable. So to me, it seems like the coaching staff thinks a lot of him. They think he's going to have a big season.
Well, and I mean, if you go back to 2019, before Kadarius Toney got it, he hadn't really done a whole lot at Florida, and a lot of us were kind of scratching our heads like, really? Kadarius Toney, of all people? Like, maybe just hold it out for another year. And then, he didn't really break out in 2019, but I think we all saw what he could do in 2020. So I think that says a lot about where Copeland's head is at in terms of working really in the offseason to better himself. And then I think it shows that they think he probably has some leadership potential as well. But Blake, let's take a quick break. I want to talk to you a little bit about maybe the most interesting storyline for Florida going into fall camp when we come back. And then we have an interesting new football series that Florida has scheduled to talk about. And I want to get a quick recruiting recap. So let's take a quick break. We'll be right back on the other side. Welcome back to the Swamp247 Podcast. I'm Thomas Goldkamp here with Blake Alderman. Blake, I wanted to talk to you about maybe what the most interesting storyline, maybe even on both sides of the ball, is going into fall camp, because when you have so many question marks offensively in terms of personnel, you're coming off a year where you really weren't very good defensively, and so a lot of things have to happen. I feel like there's a million storylines we can talk about. Let me throw it to you first defensively, because I think if that doesn't improve, Florida has a fairly low ceiling relative to what fans' expectations are. What's the most interesting storyline for you on that side of the ball?
I just think that whenever you watched Florida's defense last year and you saw how they lined up in a lot of situations, I think I lost count of how many times where it was maybe 3rd and short, or, maybe whatever yard, or excuse me, whatever the down was. There was always, in a short yardage situation, you saw these guys lined up 15, yards off, 10 yards off, giving so much cushion up. And, they run a slant and it's first down. And I felt like that was kind of a rinse, wash, repeat type of thing for Florida last year. I did pick up a lot of the spring, meetings with the coaches, through media sessions and whatnot, that they seem to put a lot more emphasis on playing man football. Jules Montanar, who Florida hired as Florida's cornerbacks coach, is kind of known for being a man coverage type of guy. You bring Wesley McGriffin, who's the safeties coach at Florida, who's a veteran in coaching, but is from hearing what people talked about him, he's very physical. He wants his players to, have a lot of physicality. So it seems like Florida's trying to get more physical on the defensive side of the ball. Just how those changes have been impacted on Florida. So I think one of the biggest storylines for me is will the scheme changes, to focusing on more man, will that help Florida's secondary, on the back end, to where they really struggled last year? And I think that, yes, they have a lot of young players, but could something so simple as changing up your scheme like that be a good fix for the defense? I would think it would, just because it seemed like, like I said, man, it's like watching, like a cartoon where it's like, watching out there, and they're giving up all that space on there, and it just seems to give a lot of guys that cushion. So that's my biggest storyline, I think, is how those changes will help Florida.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I think when I look at it, I talked about the defensive line already. I think the most interesting storyline to me is really more of a question. Is Florida going to play some of the younger guys? Because in the secondary, they're going to have to, right? I mean, you just have to. That's the guys you have. But I think more interesting to me is going to be, can Florida get guys like Tyron Hopper on the field? Can they get guys
linebacker's
like
the position that definitely jumps out at that position alone? Or
will they continue to kind of force feed snaps to the Ventrell Miller, Amari Bernies, and Ventrell Miller's going to play. I mean, he's their heart and soul on defense. He's a good communicator. I want to see other guys around him start to play, and I think the more younger guys you get involved, you can really create a sense of energy on defense. I think that's the big question mark for me. There's been a little bit too much hesitance for me from the coaching staff in sticking with veterans. I'd like to see guys like Chris Bogle more. I thought Andrew Chatfield was very effective on the pass rush when he got in there. And I know that they like to rotate, and I think that's very useful, particularly, when you come to the fourth quarter. But for me, I want to see if some of those younger guys, if they get an opportunity, and I'd like to see that happen, if they can really command more snaps. They're guys that all of a sudden you say, oh, whoa, that was really good. Let's play him more. And then they start to get, like we talked about in the first half of the show, those takeaways. You just start to build a better sense of confidence and energy around the defense. I felt like last year, it felt like the energy was just lacking on defense at times. And I think a lot of that was frustration from the stuff you pointed out, where the scheme really didn't help guys. I mean, I forget which game it was, but I will never forget. I remember Kyer Elam is covering a post with he's playing to force it to the inside, and there's no safety there, and he gets beat easily because there's no safety there, and you can just see the body language and the frustration. I think younger guys can help that, because younger guys, if they make a mistake, they kind of expect that, and then they move on. And when they make a big play, conversely, I think they bring more energy to your team than maybe kind of what we saw last year. So to me, I want to see younger guys get more involved on defense. It's going to happen to some degree, because it has to in the secondary. But in that front seven, I'd really like to see that group try to find more upside talent, more upside athleticism from guys like Tyron Hopper, Derek Wingo, like I said, Chris Bogle, some of those guys. All right,
and I think that's a good point too. And I also think too, I'm curious if just a lack of an off-season program, just the conditioning, if that played a factor into so many of the veteran guys last year. I'm curious. I think that's a bigger storyline. I think that's the real, if there was a number one storyline, I think it's that one.
Yeah, and I agree with you completely. I think it will make a big difference. But
this staff does put a lot of weight into being a veteran.
They do.
They just do.
Yeah. And I don't know. Again, I think there's merit to that. I think at a certain point, and we can talk about particular guys. I mean, I think like John DeLance, at a certain point, he's shown you what he is. And when you started 26 games and, by game 26, you still don't see a whole lot of improvement. That's when it's time to move on to a younger guy, give a younger guy a shot, build him some confidence, and kind of do that. And I know I shifted to offense there. Let's talk about offense. Which because I think you're going to talk about the O-line.
Right, and it's the offensive line. I think that's the biggest storyline on all of Florida's offense. But I think particularly for me, it's just I think you're going to see a switch from kind of style where you're not going to see them throw it all over the field like they did with Kyle Trask. I think you're going to see a lot more design QB runs, a lot more trickeration with trying to run, using a deep stable of running backs. I think that the run block game, I think, is really my biggest storyline, because Florida last year, even in other years, but last year really more in particular, they really struggled in the run blocking game. They really didn't get that push. They really didn't open up a lot of holes. So Florida's run game, whether you can argue if they really just rode the hot hand of having a great quarterback or not, but when they tried to run the ball, it just really didn't work. They didn't get that push. So I think that this year is the year where obviously fans want to see, and even I'm sure the coaches want to see, that run game improve, but I think you're going to need that run game to improve, because I think you're going to put so much more emphasis on the run game. So I think that's the biggest storyline. Can this offensive line, and you've used words like maulers when you see guys like that, and Ethan White, those kind of guys, they're going to need to be maulers. They're going to need to be opening up some holes for these running backs, and even Emory Jones in the run game, or even Anthony Richardson if they throw him in for him, from some burn for him. So I think that run game really getting that push, I think, is the biggest storyline. Can they do that?
Well, I mean, if that doesn't get going, it's going to be a long year. So
it
buckle up.
That's like, I think, like the Achilles heel of this. I think that's the make or break part.
And I'll be honest with you, my most interesting storyline on offense is Emory Jones and what he's going to look like. And I'll be honest with you, I have no idea. I have concerns about his accuracy, but to me, it's unrealistic to expect him to do what Kyle Trask did. Let's just go ahead and say that. I mean, Kyle Trask set school records for single season in passing yardage, passing touchdowns. That's not going to happen with Emory Jones. And that doesn't mean he can't be a very, very effective quarterback. But to your point, I think the run game has to get going. I look at it more, how can Emory Jones manage the balance of the offense? Because I think Florida wants to be balanced. Not that they won't skew one way or another if they have a guy like Kyle Trask.
Right, and it varies from team to team too.
Right, but I think to me the biggest question mark is, can Emory be effective enough with his arm to really keep defenses from loading the box? Because I would think early on in the season, teams are going to load the box and force him to prove that with his arm. And I think, I get a little bit concerned about I haven't quite seen it from Emory yet in terms of consistently being accurate. And somebody asked me this on Swamp247 the other day. How does Emory compare to Felipe Franks as a passer? And I think the answer is they're completely different people to me. When we watched Felipe Franks in practice for years and years and years, he always struggled with the same kinds of things. It was timing on the out routes, timing on the corner routes, and those are higher degree of difficulty throws, right? So it's more of an innate. You just know it. You have it or you don't, and you can work on it to some degree. And Dan Mullen talked about, this spring Emory was working on that. In terms of his balance, if he's more on balance as he makes throws, it's going to naturally help his timing. It's going to naturally help the accuracy. But for me, Emory's a little bit different from Felipe in that I don't really see any throws in particular that he struggles with. It just seems to be more general inconsistency in terms of accuracy. You'll have 2 or 3 passes in a row that are right on the money, perfectly timed. Then one hits the dirt or one sails high. It's enough of that inconsistency that I have question marks about his arm. Now, to your point, if the run game really picks up, I think Emory can be incredibly effective for Florida this season because, I've pointed, I think, on this podcast back to the 2015 LSU game when Treon Harris took over and LSU didn't really exactly know how to defend it. And part of that was just because Treon was so new. But what happened was he was enough of a threat with his legs that he could extend plays, and basically it turned into broken play football. And obviously you don't want to design an offense around that. But Emory can bring that to the table as well. And so if Florida's able to establish some ground game, they're able to get people crowding into the box, Emory's going to get more one-on-one opportunities down the field. It's really hard to cover guys one-on-one in man coverage when you've got a running quarterback, and the route could end up playing out any different number of ways based on kind of being backyard football. I think that's what Florida's going to that's what if things are successful, envision it being, where Emory makes a lot of off-schedule throws, outside the pocket. Guys are getting very comfortable checking back to him, knowing kind of his style of play. But then also you have enough of that run game to where you can kind of really open up your own holes. So Blake, let's shift gears a little bit. We've talked about, SEC Media Days. We've talked about some fall camp stuff. UCF. I know you're a guy that is a little closer to that area than me. Obviously, 2017, they go undefeated. They start chirping about national championships. And then 2018, Florida doesn't get matched up. I think it's 2018. Might have been 2019. They didn't get matched up with UCF in the bowl. And, UCF fans start accusing Scott Strickland of ducking them by being on the playoff committee and not wanting Florida to be embarrassed by UCF. What is this? So I guess first off, let me give the details before I get ahead of myself. Gainesville 2024 and 2033. The contract is not inked yet, but the Orlando Sentinel's reporting that from sources on both sides, we're likely to have a three-game series, 2 in Gainesville, 1 in Orlando. Games in Gainesville, again, in 2024 and 2033. So not for a bit. And then Florida will travel to Orlando in 2030. But Blake, what does this game mean? Are you happy to see this game on the schedule, or do you feel like it was unnecessary for Florida to add this?
I don't know that it's exactly necessary, just because I don't think that even if they win or lose, if you win, that's a W on your column. And if you lose, you never want to start off the season like that. But there's really no gain for Florida. I think that UCF, whenever you look at, kind of the chirping, even if you go from the back and forth on there, mostly it's, kind of the little brother kind of nipping at, at the older brother. So I don't know that there's really any gain from that, but man, I'm excited to see, the back and forth, just because there has been it, you look on social media, you see it, oh man, Florida's, doesn't want to play us, blah, 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 all these kind of things. So I don't know that you'll see any extra motivation from the players other than, maybe if they, had some ties from high school or just from being in-state guys or, those kind of things. But I think that from a fan standpoint, like, oh man, I'm excited to log on Twitter for that week leading up to, because I think that's going to be it's going to be a fun place.
A couple of years leading up to it, really.
Well, yeah.
No, dude, I'm all about it. I think, I've been vocal about Scott Strickland's scheduling philosophy since he arrived at Florida and really beefing it up with Power 5 teams. But I think if you're never going to have a schedule where you play 4 non-conference Power 5 teams and then 8 SEC teams. That's not going to happen. So right. With those extra couple games, those 1 or 2 a year, to be able to get a program like UCF that who knows where they'll be in 2024 or 2033 or any of these games. But it's intriguing. You know what I mean? It's something that everybody's going to talk about. It really gets your fans involved and hyped up locally. I think that's a great idea. I know that Florida was open to it, back when Danny White was the AD at UCF and he didn't really want to get into a 2-for-1. To me, that's great. I think it's cool. It's a cool opportunity for Florida fans to be able to go watch a game in Orlando. And, Florida obviously has a big fan base there. For them not to be able to have to travel for that one game and see Florida in a little bit of a different environment, I think it's cool. I think it's good for the sport. I think the more we get matchups like these that, have that passion and that fire that college football fans kind of bring to the table, the better. So I'm all about it. Blake, let's move on to recruiting. I don't want the show to go too long, but it has been a while since we last podcasted. Florida had a very, very busy month of June. Can you walk us through? Obviously, Florida picked up a number of commitments. Maybe can we get some brief details on those guys? And then I guess maybe just where you feel recruiting's at right now.
Yeah, I think that it was a busy June, obviously, with camps, unofficial visits, official visits, different kind of workouts going on. But I think the biggest commitment for Florida that came on one of their weekends following, an official visit weekend, that 18th through the 20th, I believe it was from 4-star linebacker Shamar James out of Alabama. out of the Mobile area. And the Mobile area, Florida has obviously tried to recruit the state of Alabama hard. You look at just some of the guys they've landed out there, but that Mobile area, is really an area where they, a guy like LaMichael P. Ryan, they've got other guys. I believe that Jeremiah Williams, who Florida signed in this last cycle, is from somewhere around in that area too. Kadarius Toney is another one. And that's one guy that Shamar actually pointed out that, growing up when he was in like middle school or whatever it was, maybe even elementary, that he would go to the games where Kadarius Toney was playing on a Friday night. And it was like, he said that it was like always packed and everyone wanted to go see Kadarius Toney. So that was where he started to really watch Florida, where they started to sign some of those guys out of the state of Alabama. So I thought that was kind of a cool story. But it was for Florida because not only are you getting a 4-star top 247 type guy who's an elite talent, but you're getting more of those linebackers that are really athletic that Florida's been trying to get more into the program. But he's not just is he a buck? Is he a linebacker? I think he's someone that's coming in with a little bit more size on him. And anytime you beat a guy that, obviously used an official visit to Alabama, Alabama was the crystal ball leader for him. That's a big win for Florida over a program like Alabama. Chandler Smith, a wide receiver from down the Orlando area, one of the fastest guys in the country, I believe, in the 100-meter dash. And I think it was when helped, with the time that he got. So I don't know if it was an official actual time, but a 10.28 in the 100-meter dash. I mean, that's fast. I mean, that is speed. Florida, if you look from their commitment class from top to bottom, and you've got a guy like Chandler Smith, you've got Isaiah Bond, you've got Julian Humphreys, all of these guys are really fast. And Florida is really bringing in that type of speed. If you look back to the Urban Meyer days, the Chris Rainey's, the Jeff Demps, I mean, I'm sure there are other players that even off the top of my head, that kind of speed is what Florida really had a lot of success with. I think that getting those guys, the speedy type of guys, and Isaiah Bond is more of a slot receiver type of guy, but Chandler Smith is not. He's listed as 6'3". I don't know that we have an official measurement on him, but he's like 6'1", somewhere between 6'1" and 6'3". So I mean, he's not your typical speedy slot scat back type of guy, all-purpose back type of guy. He's a guy that I think is comparable in the frame to, and the staff even mentioned that to him, of Trevon Grimes. But he's got that 10.28 speed to bring with him. So I think that that's a big time weapon for Florida. He'll also run track at Florida. At least that's his plans for right now. Florida, I believe right now, correct me if I'm wrong, Florida does not have a scholarship kicker on the roster, correct? They're all walk-ons or preferred walk-ons.
Yep.
So Florida was really looking forward. They landed the transfer from Mississippi State that'll be there this coming season, but they really wanted to land a scholarship kicker for the future, and they did that in June as well. And Trey Smack, he's out of the Maryland area. I think on the Coles kicking, which knows way more than me about kickers, because I'm not going to lie, that's not really my forte, but he's the number 3 kicker on their rankings. So I've seen clips of him, kicking from 55, from 60 yards with accuracy. Obviously, having a leg like that, Florida losing out on a guy like Evan McPherson, who's now with the Cincinnati Bengals. Florida was going to have a need for, that one of those big legs that, you've had with him. So, I guess it's a good get. I don't really know kickers, but when I watch the videos of him, the kick goes far and it goes to the middle of the upright. So I guess we're good. So, and then the final one was Jamarian Burt. He's listed as an athlete. He'll play defensive back corner for Florida. He's from Ocala Forest, so he's a fairly local guy. And it was a guy that kind of popped up on the radar after he went to his team, with his teams rather, on a 7-on-7 event that Florida had with his Forest team. They really watched him run. They liked what they saw, and they asked him to come back for a private workout whenever he came in on one of the days. I can't remember what day it was off the top of my head, but he came in, worked out with Jules Montanar, Florida's new cornerbacks coach. And I was told that, whenever he was doing his workouts, I mean, he popped off a 4.3, a 4.4. I believe he's around 6 foot, 6'1". So he's kind of a longer, lanky type of guy. So that kind of speed, again, was really something that they've really tried to covet this cycle. So that was a pretty nice get for Florida. I do think that, he's a guy that you could have maybe let your defensive backboard play out. But at the time they had Devin Moore, who's since committed to Notre Dame. Azariah Thomas, a guy at a Niceville 4-star cornerback there. Florida still had some options. Some of those options have fallen off the board. So I guess it makes a little bit more sense now on Burt, get him in the boat, continue to fend off guys on Julian Humphreys, who's Florida's other cornerback commit, who's still keeping, his ears open to other schools. He's planning to take some visits down the line. So I guess locking in a guy like that makes a little bit more sense now in hindsight. But at the time, I thought it was a guy that Florida could have took a little bit later. But that type of speed is what they really liked from him. And I think that, he's a guy that, where they continue to build those young players in the defensive back, got the length and the speed, and that's something that they seem to covet.
Blake, I know Florida, especially in that first weekend in June, had a lot of high-profile 4-star, 5-star type guys, top 24/7 guys on campus. There seemed to be a lot of momentum. Now that we're 2 weeks into July, getting close to where guys will be able to get on campus, take visits for games and that kind of thing. Where do you feel like the momentum is at with UF recruiting right now?
I do feel like when you look at that first weekend where they had all those big time guys, the 5 stars, the top 100, top 50 type players, like you said, the momentum was strong. You don't have that much momentum, and it kind of died off as guys took other visits, because that was what June was. I mean, it was just a grind of official visits for some of these guys. And I think it did start to die off. Obviously, they landed some commitments. They had some big time guys on campus. But I think that Friday Night Lights being at the end of July, or at least that final week, because there's like basically a week at the end of July where, it's all you've got for, before the season kicks back in and where visits can be taken. So I think that Florida needs to get some more of those guys on campus, 5 stars like Walter Nolan, who Florida had on that first weekend, Evan Stewart, a wide receiver that's, at the top of Florida's board at that position. If you can get some of those guys back on campus for Friday Night Lights or some kind of visits like that. Azariah Thomas is another, like I mentioned before, a big time cornerback target for Florida. He's mentioning about, at least most likely is what he said at my last check on Friday Night Lights. So if you can get some more of those big time guys on campus for Friday Night Lights, and this year it's a little bit different for Friday Night Lights. I mean, the camp and everything on Friday is traditionally pretty much the same as what it's always been, but they're doing something a little different this year to where on the Saturday following that, they're having like basically a cookout, which is something to where guys, you just don't have to come in and watch a camp or come in and camp or work out with the coaches. Obviously right. From the layoff of just, not seeing a lot of guys in person, there wasn't it's good for the coaches to see these guys work out, just because you can finally get your hands on guys. You can finally watch them move and do all the sorts of things that you weren't able to do during the past spring evaluation period, through the past fall season. You had to watch a lot of film. You had to trust your evaluation. So for the staff, Friday Night Lights is great if you have a guy that does work out. But, at the end of July, the season starting, a lot of these guys don't want to come in and work out, and I think that doing something more of like a, kind of a chill thing, having a cookout, that's something where guys are going to want to come in and want to hang out with those coaches and other players, players on the team, other commits, recruits or whatever in town. So, I think that getting a lot of those big time guys back on campus again, getting that final say before the season starts up, some of these guys are wanting to make their commitments before their senior season starts. I think that's a chance to get some momentum back in there just by getting that final say, kind of getting the last word for some of these guys before they make their decisions, before they start getting busy with the season.
And it's no secret. I mean, we've talked about it a lot. Florida staff does a lot better when they're in person with guys.
They do.
They seem very good at relationship building.
Relationship ribs. Shout out to Santa Snell.
There you go. All right. Well, Blake, unless you got anything else for us, that'll do it for this episode of the podcast.
That's all I can think of.
All right, guys. Well, we thank you for tuning in. Be sure to hit like and subscribe on the YouTube channel. If you're listening to it anywhere else, please leave us a favorable review. That'll do it for us today. We'll be back on the other side of SEC Media Days.